Hey there. Tonight we set sail not on calm waters, but on a sea carved by flame and memory. A world where truth is soaked in rum, and legends are written in salt, blood, and cannon smoke. You're not here for maps or dates. You're here to feel it. The sway of the deck beneath your boots, the sting of the ocean wind in your teeth, the weight of a blade in your palm, and a name whispered with both fear and awe. This isn't a documentary. It's not a lecture. This is a storm. A memory unraveling with every wave, every scar, every choice not easily undone. So take a moment, dim the lights, wrap yourself in something warm. Let the static hum of the modern world fall away like lantern smoke in the dark. If this is your first time aboard, welcome to the crew. If you're returning, then you already know. This is not a story about pirates. It's a story told by one. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what the sea sounds like on your side of the world. Now, close your eyes if you'd like. Take a breath and follow me into the storm. Pull that stool closer, boy. The fire's got a good heart tonight. And you look like you've never tasted true salt, never heard the timbers groan like a dying beast beneath you. But you did. Oh, you did. Every scar you don't see, every ache in these old bones I feel, they belong to you just as much as they belong to this husk I inhabit now. Let the rum warm your throat, child. It'll need warming for this journey. We're heading back to the spray that stung your eyes raw, the fear that tasted like copper on your tongue, the brief, burning joys that made it all worth it. You remember the docks, don't you? The ones that smelled of rot and desperation, not just fish guts and tar. Your life there was a cage, wasn't it? Bound by debt or circumstance, or the boot of someone stronger. There was no future you could see, just the endless gray repetition of misery. You watched the ships come and go, dreamt of a horizon you couldn't reach. And then you saw her. The serpent's kiss. She was riding low in the water, her paint scarred, her rigging a mess against the sky. But there was something in her lines, a lean, hungry look that snagged your eye. A whisper of freedom in the way she sat the water, and the men on her deck. A rough lot, scarred and loud, but they moved with a swagger you'd never seen before. They looked like they owed no man. How you got aboard, the memories hazy, blurred by time and the convenience of forgetting certain unpleasant details. Was it a promise of coin? A press gang's rough hands in the dead of night? Or maybe just a desperate scramble over the rail, driven by a hunger that gnawed deeper than any belly could feel? It doesn't truly matter now. What matters is the feel of that rough planking beneath your worn boots, the sickening lurch as the ship pulled away from shore, the world you knew shrinking behind you like a bad dream fading with the dawn. There was fear, a cold knot in your gut that threatened to loosen everything you'd ever eaten. But there was also exhilaration. The wind, clean and sharp, whipping your hair, tearing the stink of the docks from your nostrils. The endless stretch of gray-blue ahead. You were nobody. You were leaving nothing. And you were sailing towards what? You didn't know. That was the terrifying, beautiful part. The first few weeks were a blur of aching muscles and shouted orders. You were the lowest of the low, the green hand, the butt of jokes and the target of every bully's ire. You learned to tie knots until your fingers bled, to haul rope until your shoulders screamed, to swab decks that never seemed to stay clean, even when the sea was calm. The sun beat down on you, the salt spray pickled you, the food was hardtack and salted meat that tasted like grief. You took your lumps, kept your mouth shut, and watched. Always watching. Learning the names, the faces, the unspoken rules of this brutal floating world. Some men were cruel for cruelty's sake. Others had a rough sort of decency buried beneath layers of scar tissue and cynicism. You saw Silas, the quartermaster, early on. A man built like a barrel with a beard like spun copper and eyes that missed nothing. He moved with a quiet authority that commanded respect more effectively than shouts ever could. He didn't speak to you directly much at first, but you felt his gaze on you, weighing you, testing you. And Thorn, the captain, a figure of quiet power, often standing alone on the quarterdeck, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He wasn't a bellowing tyrant, but his calm commands carried absolute finality. He had a scar that ran from his temple to his jaw, a jagged line that hinted at a history as sharp and dangerous as his cutlass. He was both terrifying and, in a strange way, compelling. He was the eye of the storm, the still point around which the chaos of the crew revolved. Your first taste of true action. Ah, that washes over you now, doesn't it? The memory sharp and coppery. You were still green, barely understood which end of a belaying pin was for hitting. A sail was spotted, a plump merchantman, slow and low in the water, ripe for the picking. The order came, crisp and sudden. The ship's mood shifted instantly. The lazy calm shattered, replaced by a coiled, predatory energy. Men checked their pistols, sharpened cutlasses on whetstones, their faces hardening into masks of grim purpose. The chase began. The serpent's kiss surged forward, a predator closing on its prey. The wind filled her sails, the timbers groaned with the strain. There was a thrill in it, pure and electric, mixed with a cold, nauseating fear. You were part of something fast, powerful, and utterly ruthless. Then came the cannon fire. Not a distant rumble, but a deafening roar that shook the ship to its very bones. A sound that vibrated in your chest and made your teeth ache. Splintering wood, the scream of a man hit by shrapnel, the thick, acrid smell of powder smoke burning your nostrils. It was chaos, noise, violence on a scale you'd never imagined. No glory, no heroism, just the terrifying reality of two wooden ships trying to tear each other apart. Grapples flew, lines tightened, pulling the two ships together with a sickening crunch. The order to board. Your gut twisted. You were handed a boarding axe, heavy and unfamiliar in your sweaty hand. Fear, cold and absolute, locked your limbs for a second. Then a rough hand, maybe Silas's, maybe just another eager face in the rush, shoved you forward. Over the rail, boy, move! You scrambled across the narrow gap, onto the deck of the merchantman. It was a slaughterhouse, screaming, panicked sailors, cutlasses flashing, the wet thud of bodies falling. You saw Silas, a blur of controlled violence, his cutlass a deadly extension of his arm. You saw Thorn, calm amidst the storm, directing his men with curt gestures, his own blade moving with precise, deadly efficiency. And you froze. Confronted by a young sailor, his face a mask of pure terror, wielding nothing more than a wooden marlin spike in his trembling hand. Your axe felt impossibly heavy. You couldn't lift it, couldn't strike. Not at that face, that raw, naked fear that mirrored your own. You were paralyzed by the reality of it, the taking of a human life. It wasn't a glorious moment of combat, it was just killing. Before you could move, before the sailor could act, a roar erupted beside you. Grubber, the brute with teeth like a broken fence. He shoved past you, a cutlass in his hand, and brought it down on the sailor without a second thought. A sickening sound, a brief, choked cry, and the sailor crumpled to the deck. Grubber turned on you, his face contorted with rage and spittle. What are you waiting for, whelp? A formal invitation. He raised his blood-soaked cutlass, ready to turn his fury on you. Then a voice like grinding stone cut through the noise. Silas. He was there, not with a weapon raised against Grubber, but with a glare that would curdle rum. Leave him, Grubber. He's green. He'll learn. Silas's presence, his authority was enough. Grubber grumbled, spat at your feet with contempt, but lowered his blade and moved on, looking for other targets. That was the first chase for you. Not the thrill of victory, but the paralyzing terror of confronting another human being, the gut-wrenching reality of death, and the grim, silent protection of the quartermaster. You didn't kill anyone that day. You didn't strike a blow. You just survived. And you learned that the sea was cruel, and the men who sailed her crueler still. But there was a strange, brutal code among them. A pack mentality. And you were, however reluctantly, part of the pack now. After that first prize was taken, the air aboard the Serpent's Kiss shifted. Not in a way that erased the memory of the fight, but with the release that comes after shared peril. The rum flowed freely. Coins were counted and divided according to the articles, a brutal but often fair distribution. You got a pittance, barely enough to buy a few trinkets in port, but it was your pittance. Earned with sweat and fear and the silent intervention of Silas. It felt different from stolen bread or charity. It felt like independence, a sliver of self-worth carved out of the chaos. You saw what the life offered. Freedom from masters, freedom from the chains of land-bound existence, the ability to steer your own course, quite literally, and the promise of wealth, glittering and elusive just over the horizon. You also saw the cost, the violence, the constant danger, the loss of innocence. You buried men you'd shared a meal with just hours before. You saw the casual brutality that was part of the daily rhythm. Men losing fingers over dice, brawls ending with knives, harsh punishments doled out for minor infractions. It wasn't a romantic life. It was hard, dirty, and always just a step away from death. But the sea called to you, the sheer, boundless scale of it, the power of a storm that could humble any man, any ship, the quiet beauty of a starlit night far from any shore, the mast tracing lazy arcs against the cosmos. You learned to read the waves, to feel the shift in the wind, to understand the language of the rigging. The ship became an extension of yourself. The crew became your world, your whole messy, dangerous world. You found your place, not at the front of a charge, not barking orders, but in the quiet efficiency of the ship's work. You had good eyes, you were quick in the rigging, and you learned to anticipate the needs of the ship and the crew. You were reliable. In a life built on chaos, reliability was a valuable currency. Silas noticed, Thorne noticed. There were port calls, of course. Brief, frantic explosions of shore leave in places like Port Royal or the seedier coves of Hispaniola. Places smelling of exotic spices, cheap perfume, and danger. Taverns overflowing with sailors and rogues, music loud and raucous, rum flowing like water. You saw things there that would curdle the blood of a saint, and things that offered a brief, intoxicating escape from the grinding reality of the sea. There were women, too. Fleeting encounters, brief flashes of warmth and connection in the darkness, gone by morning like mist. They were sailors' comforts, temporary harbors for lonely men, leaving behind little more than a memory of soft skin and a borrowed name. Not love, not even close, but a brief, human connection in a world that often felt devoid of it. They were part of the life, another fleeting wave in the endless ocean of experience. There was a man named Mateo. He was older, a Spaniard with a weathered face and a quiet sadness in his eyes. He played a simple wooden flute in the quiet hours, mournful tunes that spoke of distant lands and lost loves. He didn't talk much about his past, but he treated you with a quiet respect that you hadn't found elsewhere. He taught you to patch a sail, to carve simple figures from driftwood, to find comfort in the silence between the storms. He was your first real friend on the ship. He was lost in a squall off the coast of Hispaniola, swept overboard before anyone could reach him. You never forgot the hollow ache left behind, the silence where his music used to be. You learned that companionship on the sea was a precious, fragile thing, easily broken. As time went on, the fear didn't vanish entirely, but it changed. It became a cold, sharp awareness, a readiness. You learned to handle the boarding axe, then a cutlass. You learned to fire a pistol, the recoil bruising your palm. You were still not a bloodthirsty killer, but you would defend yourself, defend the ship, defend your crew. Survival was the new instinct. You participated in more raids. Spanish plate ships heavy with silver, French sugar traders, even English merchantmen if the opportunity was ripe and the risk calculated. You learned the rhythm of the attack, the chase, the broadside, the boarding, the plunder, the hasty retreat before the Navy arrived. The thrill was addictive, a potent mix of adrenaline and greed. The fear was always there, a low hum beneath the excitement. And yes, you killed. Not always cleanly, not always easily. But you did what you had to do to survive, to ensure the pack survived. The face of the man you killed blurred, replaced by the grim necessity of the act. There was talk, low and speculative at first, of a legendary treasure. Not just a chest of coins, but something vast, something hidden away by a long-dead pirate captain, rumored to be on an island not marked on any chart. It was the stuff of sea shanties and drunken whispers, but Thorn listened. He had a hunger for more than just the easy prizes. He had ambition, and that ambition began to steer the Serpent's Kiss towards more dangerous waters. You remember the stop in Tortuga? The raucous, lawless port where every vice was for sale and every man carried a blade. It was a shock after weeks at sea, the sudden press of bodies, the riot of smells and sounds. You saw things there that would curdle the blood of a saint. Men who'd cheat you for a button, brawls over a spilled drink, the casual cruelty that was part of the furniture. But you also saw a rough kind of freedom. A place where you weren't judged by your birth or your past, only by your willingness to live and let live, or die trying. It had a chaotic energy, a sense of living purely in the moment, that was strangely liberating. It was in Tortuga you met her. Elena. She ran a small cantina, a place less rowdy than the others, tucked away from the main street. She had eyes the color of the sea on a cloudy day, and a smile that was rare but genuine. She wasn't like the women who frequented the docks, hardened by their lives. She had a quiet strength, a grace that seemed out of place in that setting. You were drawn to her. You spent your meager share of plunder on terrible rum, just to sit in her cantina, just to watch her move, to hear her soft voice. You didn't talk much at first. What did you have to offer? A life of danger and uncertainty. But she saw something in you, too. Perhaps the part that still flinched at the casual cruelty, the part that missed the quiet tunes of Mateo's flute. You began to talk about the sea, about the places you'd seen, carefully edited to omit the blood and the fear. She told you about her life, about escaping something she didn't name, about finding a precarious independence in Tortuga. You found solace in her presence, a brief harbor from the storm of your life. You fell in love with her, didn't you? Deeply, irrevocably. It was a quiet, aching kind of love, born in hushed conversations and stolen moments. You knew it couldn't last, not with the life you led. But you clung to it anyway. It was a fragile, beautiful thing in a brutal world. Thorn heard about the treasure whispers, too. More than whispers now. There were old charts, fragmented pieces of information, traded in hushed tones in the back rooms of taverns. An island called Isla de la Sombra, the island of shadows, shrouded in tales of curses and impossible geography. It captured Thorn's imagination. He wasn't interested in raiding merchantmen anymore. He wanted the legend. This quest for the legendary treasure began to consume him. He grew more withdrawn, poring over maps and fragmented journals. The crew sensed the shift. Some were excited by the promise of unimaginable wealth. Others were wary of chasing ghosts and curses. Discontent began to brew beneath the surface. The easy rhythm of successful raids was replaced by long, frustrating voyages into the unknown. Thorn pushed the ship harder, venturing into uncharted waters. The voyages became longer, the searches more frustrating. Supplies ran low, tempers flared. The camaraderie that had bound the crew began to fray. Whispers turned into open grumbling. There was a new man among the officers, recruited in a backwater port. His name was Calder, smooth-tongued, with eyes too close together and a smile that didn't reach them. He was superficially charming, able to spin a yarn or tell a joke, but there was a calculating coldness about him. He was always in Thorn's ear, offering advice, sowing seeds of doubt about the loyalty of others. You didn't trust him from the start. Your gut screamed a warning whenever he was near. The search for Isla de la Sombra led you through treacherous reefs and unpredictable currents. You weathered storms that threatened to tear the Serpent's Kiss apart. You faced down a Spanish warship, a desperate battle where skill and sheer audacity were your only weapons. You fought with a ferocity you didn't know you possessed, defending the deck, the ship, your life. Men died that day, good men. But you survived. The Serpent's Kiss survived, battered but victorious. The cost was high. Through it all, the thought of Elena kept you going. You held on to the memory of her smile like a lifeline. You promised yourself that one day you would find the treasure, make enough money to leave the life behind, and return to Tortuga for her. It was a foolish dream, perhaps, built on sand and salt spray, but it was your dream. The crew's patience wore thin. Weeks turned into months of fruitless searching. The rum ran low, the food was wormy, the heat was oppressive. Calder, ever the snake, began openly questioning Thorn's leadership. He played on the men's frustrations, painting Thorn as a madman chasing a fairy tale while real prizes sailed by. Some men listened. Greed and discontent are potent poisons. He cultivated alliances, quiet agreements made over watered rum in the forecastle. The lines were being drawn. The tension snapped on a sweltering afternoon, the air thick with unspoken threat. Calder confronted Thorn on the quarterdeck, not with a challenge to fight, but with a proposal. Abandon the search, return to profitable hunting grounds, and Calder would share the leadership, ensuring the crew was happy. It was a thinly veiled mutiny. The air crackled with anticipation. Every man on deck knew this was the moment. The air grew heavy on the Serpent's Kiss. It wasn't just the humidity of the tropics. It was the weight of unspoken words, of suspicion, of choices being made in the dark corners of men's minds. You felt it, didn't you? That prickle of unease, the way conversations stopped abruptly when you approached, the sidelong glances. Calder's poison was spreading, finding fertile ground in the weary hearts and empty pockets of the crew. The breaking point came, as these things always do, unexpectedly, even when you know it's coming. It was just after dawn. The sun was painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges, a beautiful, deceptive calm after a night of restless tension. Thorn was on the quarterdeck, as was his custom, watching the horizon, a solitary figure outlined against the dawning light. Silas was nearby, overseeing the morning duties, his presence a silent promise of order. Calder emerged from below decks, surrounded by a knot of men. Not all of them, but enough. Rough faces, eyes avoiding Thorn's gaze, hands resting a little too casually on belt knives or pistol butts. Calder himself looked smooth, almost cheerful, dressed too finely for a pirate at sea. He stopped a few paces from the base of the quarterdeck ladder, looking up at Thorn. His voice was pitched to carry, calm but firm. "Captain Thorn." Thorn turned slowly, his expression unreadable. His hand was already near the hilt of his cutlass. "Calder, we've been sailing in circles for too long, Captain," Calder continued, his smile thin. "Chasing ghosts, The men are restless. The stores are low. There are rich prizes to be had, but not out here in the middle of nowhere. He gestured vaguely towards the empty sea. A murmur went through the men behind Calder. They shifted uneasily, but they stayed put. "Are you questioning my command, Calder?" Thorn's voice was low, dangerous. "I'm suggesting a change of direction, Captain," Calder said, his tone reasonable, but his eyes hard. The men agree. "We return to profitable waters. We share command, fairly. The days of one man's obsession dictating the fate of the crew are over." It was a clear challenge, mutiny, plain and simple. The air crackled. Men who were not part of Calder's group froze where they were, caught between sides. Your own hand went instinctively to your cutlass. Thorn didn't answer with words. With a speed that belied his years, he drew his cutlass and leaped from the quarterdeck, landing lightly on the main deck. The sound of steel clearing leather was sharp, final. Calder stumbled back, surprised by the sudden, violent reaction. He wasn't a fighter, not in the open. His strength was in whispers and poison, but the men behind him surged forward. Silas roared, a sound like a bull, and drew his own cutlass, stepping to Thorn's side. "Stand with the captain," he bellowed. And the deck erupted. It wasn't a clean, ordered battle. It was a chaotic, brutal brawl. Men you had sailed with for years, eaten with, shared watches with, were suddenly your enemies. Blades drawn, faces contorted with anger or fear or greed. You fought with a cold fury. You saw faces you knew, distorted by rage or fear. You blocked a cut from a man named Finn, a quiet deckhand, his eyes wide with a desperate loyalty to Calder. You parried, thrust, and felt your blade connect with something soft. He went down with a gurgle, and you didn't have time to feel anything but the need to keep fighting. Silas was a force of nature beside you, his cutlass a blur, his massive frame absorbing blows that would have felled other men. He fought with a quiet, deadly efficiency, protecting Thorn's flank as the captain engaged the main body of the mutineers. Then you saw it, out of the corner of your eye. A man you didn't recognize, a recent addition to the crew, slinking low, avoiding the main fray. He held a long knife, not a cutlass, and his eyes were fixed on Silas. Before you could shout a warning, before you could move, the man lunged. Silas turned, but too late. The knife plunged into his back just below the shoulder blade. He grunted, a sound of surprise and pain, and stumbled forward. He tried to turn, his cutlass still raised, but his legs gave way. He fell to the deck with a heavy thud, the knife handle protruding grotesquely. Rage, hot and blinding, surged through you. Silas, the man who had shown you grudging kindness, who had taught you, who had stood by you. He was down. You roared, a sound ripped from your gut, and lunged at the man with the knife. He was startled by your sudden attack. He was quicker than Silas, but not a skilled fighter. You pressed him hard, your grief and anger fueling your attacks. He parried wildly, his eyes darting, looking for an escape. You saw an opening, a moment of hesitation, and you drove your cutlass forward. He cried out, a high, thin sound, and stumbled back, tripping over a coil of rope. He went over the rail with a splash, swallowed by the sea. You turned back to Silas. He was lying still, his face pale, his breath shallow. You knelt beside him, ignoring the ongoing fight around you for a moment. His eyes fluttered open and found yours. There was pain there, but also acceptance. He tried to speak, but only a rattle came from his throat. He reached out a hand, smeared with blood, and gripped your arm weakly. His eyes held yours for a long moment, a look that conveyed more than words ever could. A final acknowledgement. A passing of something intangible. Then his grip loosened, his eyes glazed over, and his hand fell back to the deck. Silas was gone. The fight didn't last much longer after that. Thorn, enraged by Silas's death, fought with savage intensity. He was a whirlwind of steel, cutting down those who stood against him. Calder, seeing his plan unravel and his men being cut down, tried to retreat, melting back towards the forecastle. But Thorn was on him. He cornered Calder near the mainmast, his cutlass point held steady, breathing hard. Calder was unarmed, his face slick with sweat and terror. He pleaded, he offered gold, anything. Thorn looked at him, his face grim, his eyes cold as the deepest ocean trench. "You killed Silas," he said, his voice flat. It wasn't a question. Calder stammered denials, but Thorn didn't listen. He didn't kill Calder quickly. He had him lashed to the mast, visible to the entire ship, a grim warning. His fate was left to the elements, a slow, agonizing end as a lesson to anyone else who might contemplate treachery. It was a brutal, unforgiving justice, but it was the law of the sea among pirates. The fight was over. The deck was a mess of blood, bodies, and discarded weapons. Men lay dead or wounded. The remaining mutineers, those who hadn't fled or been killed, were rounded up. Thorn, his face a mask of weary grimness, gave the order. They were put in a longboat with minimal provisions, enough to perhaps reach a distant shore, or perhaps not. A pirate's mercy. You helped tend to the wounded, both yours and theirs, with a grim efficiency born of necessity. You helped clean the deck, the slick, dark stains a constant reminder of what had happened. You helped lower the bodies of your fallen comrades, the few who had stood with Thorn and Silas, into the sea. There were no grand speeches, just the splash, the silence, and the heavy weight of loss. Silas was among them. You stood at the rail as his body, wrapped in canvas, slipped beneath the waves. A part of you went with him, the quiet friend, the stern mentor, the steadfast presence, gone. The crew was decimated. Many were dead, others set adrift. The remaining men were shaken, their faces etched with the horrors they had witnessed and participated in. Distrust lingered, but it was overshadowed by a grim solidarity. They had survived the mutiny. They were the ones who remained. Thorn was different after that. The fire in his eyes was still there, but it burned with a colder, more desperate light. The loss of Silas hit him hard, though he rarely showed it openly. His obsession with Isla de la Sombra intensified. It was no longer just a quest for treasure. It became a driving need to justify the cost, the lives lost in the mutiny. He had to prove that Silas and the others hadn't died for a fool's errand. He pushed the ship relentlessly. The search became more focused, more urgent. Using the fragmented charts and old journals, he steered the Serpent's Kiss into waters rarely traveled, through treacherous passages and around remote, uninviting islands. The voyages were long, arduous, and often fruitless. Weeks turned into months. The remaining crew worked hard, bound by necessity and a shared grim purpose. There was little of the old camaraderie left, replaced by a quiet, resilient determination to see this through, for Thorn, for themselves, for the ghosts of their fallen comrades. You were one of the few who had been on the ship for years, who had seen it all. You were no longer the green hand. You were a seasoned survivor, tested by storm, battle, and betrayal. Thorn relied on you, and on the other few old hands who remained. You understood the ship, understood the sea, understood the silent language of the crew. The whispers of the legendary treasure of Isla de la Sombra took on a different quality now. No longer just tavern tales. They were woven into the fabric of your daily existence, the goal that drove you through hardship and doubt. Then, one hazy morning, you saw it, a smudge on the horizon that resolved itself into a small island. Unremarkable at first glance, just another patch of green in the vast blue. But as you drew closer, navigating through a maze of hidden reefs that would tear the bottom out of any ship that didn't know the way, You felt a sense of unease. The air changed. It became heavy, still, unnaturally silent. The usual sounds of the sea, the cries of gulls, the distant roar of surf, seemed muted, swallowed by the island's presence. The coastline was forbidding, cliffs rising sheer from the water, dense jungle clinging to the slopes. There were strange, twisted rock formations along the shore, looking like petrified sentinels. It matched the descriptions in Thorne's journals, the treacherous reefs, the unusual rock shapes, the feeling of isolation. This was it. Isla de la Sombra, the Island of Shadows. Anchoring was difficult, finding a sheltered spot within the reef barrier a tense operation. Finally, the anchor chain rattled, biting into the seabed in a small, secluded cove. The silence of the island was palpable now, pressing in on you. It felt wrong, as if the island was holding its breath, watching. Thorne organized the landing party, a small group, heavily armed. He wouldn't risk the entire crew ashore. You were among the first over the side into the longboat. The water of the cove was clear but seemed unnaturally dark, reflecting the dense canopy of the jungle above. Going ashore was like entering another world. The heat was stifling, humid, and heavy. The jungle was incredibly dense, a tangled mass of vines, trees, and undergrowth. The air buzzed with insects, but the usual calls of birds or monkeys were absent. It was too quiet. You followed Thorne as he led the way, machetes hacking a path through the thick vegetation. The light was dim, filtered through the dense canopy, creating deep, shifting shadows. The ground was uneven, slippery with damp leaves and moss. The deeper you went, the more the feeling of unease grew. The trees seemed to twist into unnatural shapes, their branches reaching like skeletal fingers. You began to see them, carvings on rocks, on the trunks of ancient trees. Crude, unsettling symbols that looked vaguely familiar, like something from a nightmare you couldn't quite recall. They were old, weathered by centuries, but they still held a faint, disquieting power. They seemed to watch you from the shadows. The air grew colder despite the humidity. A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. A coldness that felt like dread settling into your bones. The feeling of being watched intensified. Then you found it. Not a wide, open path, but a narrow track that seemed less overgrown than the surrounding jungle. It led uphill, towards the heart of the island. Thorne followed it without hesitation, his eyes gleaming with a feverish anticipation that bordered on madness. You reached a clearing. It was dominated by a single, enormous banyan tree, its aerial roots forming a tangled, dripping curtain around a mound of stones. And within the mound, partially hidden by the roots, was a dark opening, an entrance into the earth. The air here was thick, charged with an almost palpable energy. It hummed with something ancient, something malevolent. It felt like stepping across a threshold into a place that was not meant for the living. Thorne didn't pause. He strode towards the entrance, his hand on his cutlass, his face set. You followed, your heart hammering against your ribs. The other men hesitated, their eyes wide with fear, but Thorne's presence, his sheer will, pulled them forward. Inside, it was utterly dark. You lit lanterns, their flickering light pushing back the oppressive blackness, revealing rough-hewn walls covered in more of the strange carvings. The air was heavy, stale, and had a faint metallic tang. The passage led downwards, a slow, winding descent into the belly of the island. The sense of unease became overwhelming dread. The silence here was absolute, broken only by your footsteps and the sound of your own ragged breathing. The carvings on the walls seemed to writhe in the lantern light, their symbols disturbing and indecipherable. This felt like a tomb or a cage for something best left undisturbed. You reached a chamber deep underground, and there it was. Not a pile of glittering treasure, but a single, large chest, bound with dark iron, sitting on a stone pedestal in the center of the room. It wasn't ostentatious, but it radiated a sense of immense age and power. And beside it, slumped against the wall, was a skeleton clad in the rotting remnants of a pirate captain's finery, a rusted cutlass lying nearby. The legendary pirate guarding his legendary treasure even in death. Thorn approached the chest, his eyes fixed on it, his movements stiff with anticipation. He reached out a hand, his fingers trembling slightly, to touch the iron binding. As his fingers brushed the metal, a gust of wind, cold and unnatural, swept through the sealed chamber. It wasn't air moving, it felt like something unseen pushing past. Some of the lanterns flickered and went out, plunging parts of the chamber into deeper shadow. Then you heard them. Whispers. Not in any language you knew, but a sibilant rustling sound that seemed to come from the walls themselves, from the very air around you. They slithered into your mind, indistinct, chilling, filled with ancient malice. The carvings on the walls seemed to shift and writhe in the flickering light of the remaining lanterns, and the skeleton, it stirred. Slowly, bone grinding against bone, it began to move. An arm twitched, a leg straightened. The skull turned on the spinal column, the empty eye sockets fixing on Thorn. A dry, rattling sound came from the jaw, like stones shifting. It was real. The curse, the legend, it wasn't just a story. The pirate's spirit, bound to his treasure, to this island, rising to defend it. Panic ripped through the other men. They cried out in terror, stumbling back, their faces pale masks of fear. The whispers intensified, seeming to swirl around them, playing on their deepest fears, whispering promises of freedom, of safety, if they would just leave, run. Thorn, though clearly shaken, recovered himself. He drew his cutlass, turning to face the reanimated skeleton. It was a ghastly, unnatural opponent. You stood frozen for a moment, caught between terror and a strange, grim fascination. This was not a fight you had trained for, steel against bone that felt no pain. The other men broke. One by one they turned and scrambled back the way they had come, abandoning Thorn, abandoning the treasure, abandoning everything but their desperate need to escape this cursed place. Their frantic footsteps echoed up the passage. You didn't follow them. You couldn't. Whether it was shock or some lingering sense of loyalty to Thorn, or sheer paralyzing dread, you remained rooted to the spot. You watched as Thorn engaged the skeleton. It was a grotesque dance. Thorn, skilled and brave, his cutlass flashing, parrying and striking. The skeleton moving with jerky, unnatural speed, relentless, impervious to his blows. The whispers filled the air, a disorienting chorus of ancient voices. Thorn fought desperately, but it was a futile struggle. The skeleton lunged, its rusty cutlass scraping against Thorn's steel. There was a brief, violent struggle, a choked cry from Thorn as the skeleton overwhelmed him, and then silence. The skeleton slumped back against the wall, motionless once more. The whispers faded, leaving behind a heavy, suffocating quiet. You were alone, in the chamber with the coffer, the two skeletons, and the oppressive ancient presence of the island. The treasure, the object of Thorn's obsession, of the mutiny, so much death, sat on its pedestal. It didn't look inviting. It looked like a trap, a curse given tangible form. You didn't approach it. You didn't touch it. The desire for wealth, the dreams of a life ashore, of Elena, they felt distant, insignificant, hollow in the face of what you had just witnessed. You finally understood the legend. The treasure wasn't just guarded, it was bound, intertwined with the spirit of its owner, with the very essence of this cursed island. You turned and left the chamber, your footsteps echoing unnervingly in the silence. You walked back through the dark passage, the carvings on the walls seeming to twist and leer in the fading light of your lantern. You emerged into the stifling heat of the jungle, blinking in the filtered sunlight, the air outside feeling cool and clean by comparison, despite the humidity. You made your way back to the cove. The ship was still there, a reassuring sight. The remaining crew on board looked at you with fearful, questioning eyes as you returned alone. You were grim-faced, your clothes torn, your hands scraped. You told them Thorn was dead. You told them there had been trouble, a cave-in, a rock slide. You didn't tell them about the skeleton, about the whispers, about the ancient curse. Some truths are too strange, too terrifying, too steeped in the unnatural for men who live by the practical dangers of the sea and the sword. Let the island keep its secrets. Let the legend remain distorted by distance and fear. The news of Thorn's death following so closely after the mutiny and the loss of so many men hit the crew hard. The ship, already diminished, felt even emptier. The dream of the great treasure which had driven them for so long had ended not in riches but in death and fear. You were one of the only senior men left, one of the few links to the ship's past, to Thorn's legacy, however tarnished. The remaining crew looked to you. There was no one else. Command fell to you not because you sought it, but because you had survived. You had faced the darkness on the island and returned. With a heavy heart, you gave the order to weigh anchor. Leaving Isla de la Sombra behind felt like casting off a lead weight. The sea was still dangerous, still full of threats, but at least it was a danger you understood. The supernatural horrors of the island were something else entirely, something that chilled you to the bone in a way no storm or cannonball ever could. You sailed away from the island of shadows, the malevolent feeling receding with distance, but the memory etched onto your soul. The quest for the legendary treasure was over. It had cost you dearly, Silas, Thorn, so many others, and a piece of your own innocence, or perhaps your sanity. What remained was a battered ship, a diminished crew, and the vast, uncertain ocean stretching before you. The life you had lived, the choices you had made, they had led you to this point. And now, you had to figure out what came next. Sailing away from Isla de la Sombra felt like leaving a weight behind, or perhaps carrying a new invisible one. The silence on board was heavy, broken only by the creak of timbers and the wash of the waves. Thorn was gone. Silas was gone. The men who had sided with Calder were gone. What remained was a crew forged in hardship, diminished by loss, and haunted by the silent horrors of that island. The voyage back towards any semblance of civilization was a grim one. Supplies were low, the ship needed repairs, and the mood was somber. You were the captain now by default, by survival. The men looked to you for orders, for direction. It was a responsibility you hadn't sought, a mantle thrust upon you in the wake of disaster. You steered the Serpent's Kiss away from the legends and the curses towards the familiar dangers of the established sea lanes. There was no grand plan, just the immediate need to replenish stores, make repairs, and decide what future, if any, remained for this crew and this ship. The journey was a test of resilience. You worked alongside the men, sharing the burdens of sailing, navigating, keeping watch. You spoke little of Isla de la Sombra, offering only the convenient lie of a rock slide to those who asked, or whose fearful whispers you overheard. The truth of the moving skeleton and the chilling whispers was yours alone to carry, a cold, unsettling memory tucked away in the dark corners of your mind. The men who remained were the tough ones, the loyal ones, the survivors. They trusted you because you hadn't abandoned them, because you had faced the unknown and returned, however shaken. A different kind of camaraderie began to form, born not of shared plunder, but of shared trauma and mutual dependence. You were a small, tight-knit pack now, all that was left of Thorne's once feared crew. Your thoughts, when they weren't consumed by the practicalities of sailing a battered ship, drifted to Tortuga, to Elena. She was a beacon in the back of your mind, a reason to keep going, a promise of warmth and connection in a life that had become increasingly cold and solitary at the top. The desire to see her again, to feel the solid ground of the port beneath your feet, grew with every passing day at sea. You reached Tortuga eventually, slipping into the harbor under a setting sun. The noise and chaos of the port felt overwhelming after the long, quiet voyage. It was a familiar chaos, though, a place where your kind could find a temporary haven. The Serpent's Kiss looked rough. Her paint was scarred, her rigging showed signs of hasty repair. She sat low in the water after months at sea. But she was still the Serpent's Kiss, and her arrival, even in this state, drew eyes. Pirates and merchants alike took note. Tales of Thorne's disappearance had likely circulated, perhaps mingled with distorted whispers of his final quest. Going ashore felt strange. The ground seemed to tilt and sway beneath you after so long on the waves. The smells were a riot: salt, fish, rum, unwashed bodies, cooking fires. You moved through the crowds, your senses assaulted, your only thought to find her. You went straight to her cantina. It was late, but a few lamps were still lit inside. You pushed open the door, the familiar sound a jolt to your memory. She was there, behind the counter, cleaning glasses, her face tired in the lamplight. She looked up as the door opened, her eyes widening in surprise. You stood there, silhouetted against the fading light from outside, a figure she must have long given up for dead. Your clothes were worn. Your face was thinner, harder than when she'd last seen you. For a moment, neither of you moved. The sounds of the port faded away. There was only the quiet hum of the lamps, the scent of stale rum and wood smoke, and the sight of her face, a mix of disbelief and something else you couldn't quite read. Then her expression softened. A wave of relief washed over her face, and that rare, genuine smile you remembered broke through. She hurried around the counter, calling your name, and you met her, holding her close, burying your face in her hair. She was real, solid, a living, breathing person in a world that had recently felt populated by ghosts and shadows. You stayed in Tortuga for a time. You needed to repair the ship, replenish stores, and decide the future. But mostly, you needed to be with her. You spent hours in the quiet of her cantina, talking in low voices after the customers were gone. You told her about the storms, the long voyages, the hardships, the men you had lost. You told her about the mutiny, the fight, the loss of Silas and Thorne, painting a picture of a difficult voyage that ended in tragedy. You could not, tell her about Isla de la Sombra, about the moving skeleton, the whispers, the ancient curse. That was a burden you carried alone. She listened patiently, her eyes holding yours, offering quiet comfort and understanding. She didn't ask you to leave the life, though you knew she worried. She understood that the sea was in your blood, now that the ship and the crew were your responsibility. Her presence was a balm, a reminder of a different kind of life, a life of simple joys and shared moments, a stark contrast to the violence and uncertainty you had come from. During your time in Tortuga, you began to notice the changes in the pirate world. The glory days were beginning to fade. The navies of the great powers, England, Spain, France, were becoming more organized, more aggressive in their patrols. Pirate strongholds were being raided and dismantled. The open seas were becoming more dangerous, the easy prizes rarer. The era of the swashbuckling pirate captain, ruling the waves with impunity, was drawing to a close. You saw younger men arriving in port, full of bluster and reckless ambition, eager to make their fortune. Many of them wouldn't last long. The risks were too high, the odds stacking against them. The experienced pirates, those who had survived for years, were becoming more cautious, more strategic. You talked with the remaining crew about the future. They were loyal, willing to follow your lead. But what kind of life could you offer them now? Simply returning to raiding merchantmen felt like a death sentence. You were too few, the competition too fierce, the patrols too vigilant. You realized that the old way of piracy was dying. You had to adapt or perish. An idea began to form, born partly of necessity, partly of a subtle shift within you. You had seen the fear in the eyes of the merchantmen and you had preyed upon. You had seen their desperation for safe passage, and you had a ship, a crew, and a formidable reputation. Instead of being predators, you could become protectors. It was a radical idea, almost unheard of among pirates, whose existence was defined by taking, not giving. But you saw a way it could work. You knew the waters. You knew the tactics of both pirates and naval patrols. You could offer safe passage to merchant ships willing to pay for it, shielding them from the more ruthless elements that still infested the seas. You put the idea to the crew. There was skepticism, even resistance. It wasn't the romanticized life of plunder and freedom they had imagined. It felt too much like honest work, albeit dangerous. But they trusted you. They had seen where the old path led, to death or capture. And they were survivors. They understood that adaptation was necessary. You began this new chapter of your life. You sailed out of Tortuga, not on the hunt, but in search of contracts. It was a strange transition. You approached merchant captains not with a cutlass drawn, but with a proposition. Protection for a price. It wasn't easy. Many merchants were wary, seeing you simply as pirates looking for a new way to extort them. Naval officers were suspicious, seeing your activities as a thinly veiled continuation of illegal acts. You had to build trust, slowly and painfully, one successful escort at a time. You proved your worth. You used the speed and maneuverability of the Serpent's Kiss to outrun or outmaneuver potential attackers. You used your knowledge of hidden coves and secret passages to evade patrols. When confrontation was unavoidable, you fought fiercely, defending your contracted vessels with the same skill and ferocity you had once used to capture them. Your reputation, forged in blood and daring, now served a different purpose. This period was marked by a different kind of tension. Less the thrill of the hunt, more the constant vigilance of the Guardian. You were still at sea, still facing danger, but the objective was different. It wasn't about taking lives or stealing cargo. It was about ensuring safe passage, about keeping your word, about protecting those who had placed their trust and their coin in your hands. You still had encounters with other pirates. Some tried to challenge you, seeing your protective role as an infringement on their territory. These encounters often ended violently, as you defended your contracts with the same ruthlessness you would have used to seize a prize in your younger days. You were still a pirate, after all, just one operating under a different code. Life in this new role brought a different kind of satisfaction. It wasn't the fleeting excitement of plunder, but a deeper sense of purpose. You were using your skills to create a degree of order, however small, in a chaotic world. You were building something, a network of cautious trust with merchants, a reputation for reliability. You returned to Tortuga when you could, to Elena. Your time together was still precious, stolen moments of peace amidst a life of constant movement and danger. She saw the change in you, the weariness, but also the quiet resolve. She was your anchor, your link, to a life outside the endless horizon. The fear for you was always in her eyes, but it was mingled with love and pride. Years passed. The lines on your face deepened, carved by the sun, the salt, The endless watch, the worry. Your hair turned gray. Your body ached in new places. The young men who joined your crew, replacing those who eventually left or were lost, looked at you with the respect and awe they might show an old sea dog, a living legend from a fading era. You were the mind of the ship, the repository of years of experience, the quiet authority figure. You saw the world changing around you. The great powers exerted more control. Forts were built, patrols increased. The age of sail was reaching its zenith, and the structures of empire were tightening their grip on the Caribbean. The freebooting pirate was becoming an endangered species. You heard the whispers of your own legend, stories of the Serpent's Kiss and her captain, distorted by rumor and time. Tales of battles fought, of daring escapes, sometimes even tinged with the strange, unsettling flavor of Isla de la Sombra, its curse transforming into a cautionary tale or a tantalizing mystery in the taverns. You listened to these tales, some wildly inaccurate, some holding a grain of truth with a detached amusement. The legend was something separate from the man, something built on the sea of memory and imagination. As you grew older, the sea demanded a heavier toll. The physical demands of captaining a ship, even one engaged in protective work, became more difficult. You found yourself spending more time navigating and planning, less time swinging a cutlass on a boarding deck. You relied more on your experienced crew, the men who had been with you for years, who understood your methods and shared your quiet loyalty. Then the news came to you at sea. A swift sloop, dispatched from Tortuga, found you on patrol. The sickness, a fever spreading rapidly through the port, taking lives indiscriminately. Your blood ran cold. Elena. You pushed the Serpent's Kiss to her limits, the old ship groaning in protest. Every sail was set, every available man on watch, straining to make speed. The race back to Tortuga was a torment of anxiety. You pictured her face, prayed she was safe, that the sickness had spared her. The vastness of the sea felt cruel, keeping you from her when she might need you most. You sailed into Tortuga harbor, the familiar sight bringing no comfort this time. The usual vibrancy was muted. Flags flew at half-mast. The air felt heavy, not with humidity, but with sorrow and fear. You went ashore immediately, leaving your first mate in charge. Your legs felt leaden as you walked through the quieter-than-usual streets. You saw houses draped in black, faces etched with grief. Dread tightened its icy grip around your heart. You reached her cantina. It was closed, barricaded. A cold, hard knot formed in your stomach. You found a neighbor, an old woman who sold fruit on the corner. Her eyes were kind, but her face was etched with weariness. You asked about Elena. The woman hesitated, her gaze softening with pity. "Oh, son," she said softly, her voice rough with emotion. "The sickness, it took so many. Poor Elena, she was one of the good ones. Gone these past few days." The words hit you like a physical blow. The world seemed to tilt, the sounds around you receding into a dull roar. Gone, just like that. The anchor, the beacon, the quiet strength that had been your steady point in a chaotic life. Extinguished. You don't remember much of the next few days clearly. A blur of numb grief, of walking aimlessly through the town, of sitting alone in the empty, silent cantina that still smelled faintly of her. The crew left you to your sorrow, understanding the depth of your loss without needing words. They stood silent watch over the ship, waiting for you to return, or not. The sea, which had always been your escape, your challenge, your life, now felt like a vast empty space that mirrored the hollow ache in your chest. The point of it all, the reason for the struggle, for the survival, for building this strange new path, it was gone. You couldn't stay in Tortuga forever. The town was a constant, painful reminder of what you had lost. The ship was still there, waiting, a silent question. The crew needed you. You were still the captain. With a heavy heart, a heart that felt like a lead weight in your chest, you returned to the Serpent's Kiss. You gave the order to sail. Leaving Tortuga this time felt different from any other departure. It felt like leaving behind the last piece of yourself that belonged on land, the last tether to a life that wasn't defined solely by the ocean and its dangers. The years that followed were long and marked by a quiet weariness. You continued your work, guiding merchant ships, navigating the increasingly complex world of the Caribbean. You were successful, respected, even in some circles. But the passion was gone. The drive that had pushed you through storms and battles, through mutiny and the horrors of Isla de la Sombra, it had died with Elena. You sailed, not for glory or gold anymore, but out of habit, out of responsibility to your crew, out of a lack of any other path. The sea was your home, but it felt emptier now. The waves still crashed against the hull, the wind still filled the sails, but the poetry had gone out of it. It was just water, wood, and the endless horizon. You saw more changes. The last of the great pirate captains were hunted down or retired. The lines between legal trade and illegal activity blurred in some ports, but the outright piracy of your youth became a thing of the past, relegated to history books and embellished legends. You grew older. The aches and pains became constants. Your vision wasn't as sharp, your movements not as quick. You spent more time on the quarterdeck, directing the younger men who now did the heavy lifting, the climbing, the fighting. You were the mind of the ship, the repository of years of experience, the quiet authority figure. You realized eventually that your time at sea was drawing to a close. The body could no longer keep up with the demands of the life. The spirit was weary. The horizon no longer called with the promise of adventure, but with the quiet insistence of rest. You made the decision. It wasn't sudden, but a gradual acceptance of the inevitable. You gathered your crew, the loyal few who remained after all those years, and told them it was time to swallow the anchor. You ensured they were provided for, dividing the accumulated wealth fairly, making sure they had options, whether it was to find berths on other ships, legitimate ones now, or to settle ashore. It was a quiet parting, marked by handshakes and gruff expressions of respect. They were your crew, your family of sorts, and letting them go was another quiet loss, but a necessary one. The Serpent's Kiss. You sold her. It felt like selling a part of yourself. She was old, but still strong, a ship with a history etched into every plank. She sailed away under a new captain, a merchant skipper, her pirate past hidden beneath a fresh coat of paint and a new name. You watched her go, a lump in your throat, the end of an era. You found a place, as I said before, a small cottage on a quiet stretch of coast, far from the ports and the noise. A place where the land met the sea, but didn't demand anything from it. You settled into a quiet rhythm, the days marked by the rising and setting of the sun, the ebb and flow of the tide. You weren't a pirate anymore, not in the eyes of the world. You were just an old man by the sea. The scars remained, physical and otherwise. The memories were your constant companions. You sat by the fire like tonight, the flames casting dancing shadows, and the sea whispered outside. It whispered of youth and daring, of storms weathered and battles fought. It whispered of laughter shared and tears shed. It whispered of betrayal and loyalty, of treasure and loss. It whispered of Isla de la Sombra, the legend growing with each passing year, its true horror known only to you. You were that boy from the docks, weren't you? The one who yearned for freedom, for a life unbound. You found it. It wasn't the clean, simple freedom you might have imagined. It was hard-won, brutal, stained with blood and loss, but it was undeniably free. You answered to no one but yourself, and eventually to the silent demands of the sea and your own aging body. You lived a life few men ever experience, a life of extremes, of profound danger and fleeting beauty, of deep camaraderie and searing loneliness. You chased horizons, faced down death countless times, loved and lost. You were a part of the last wave of a dying breed, a figure from the legends that would be told long after you were gone. And sitting here now at the end of it all, watching the fire die down, feeling the ache in your bones and the weight of the years, you look back at that young man, at the pirate you became. Was it worth it? The price was high, so very high. But the memories, they are yours, carved into you just as the waves carve the shore. They are your treasure, your legacy. The rum is gone, the fire is embers. The night is quiet, save for the distant murmur of the sea. The stories are told, and you lived them, every single word. The old pirate finishes his tale, his voice rough, his eyes fixed on the dying flames, seeing not the wood burning, but the long, winding path of a life lived on the edge of the world. His gaze settles on you, on the ghost of the man he once was, and a faint, knowing smile touches his lips. Yes, you lived it.